Welcome to this episode of Circle Back. As always, Circle Back here at Nashville Entrepreneur Center is brought to you by the generosity of the Beth and Randy Chase family, as well as the Nashville Post. We're excited for you to join us today. Today, my guest is David Ewing. David, welcome.
Thank you, Sam.
We're excited to have this conversation because there are so many entrepreneurs we have featured throughout the history of the show, the idea of circling back, that they've had some level of success and then also wanted to give it back or pay it back or pay it forward to the next generation. And you, are an entrepreneur. I consider an entrepreneur. We're going to talk about sort of what you do and how you got there. But also you were sort of the keeper of so many of these stories that we're going to want to get into that we may not have a chance to hear from the entrepreneur. But we'll get there. First of all, tell us about yourself. The first question I always ask folks is, what is the first thing you did? Didn't have to make money at it, but the first thing you did that was entrepreneurial, or the first exposure that you had to entrepreneurship?
Sure. I grew up here in Nashville, Tennessee. My family has actually been here since 1779.
So you're not just a unicorn, you are a unicorn of unicorns.
Yes.
If you will.
Oldest black family in Nashville. The first 3 generations of those 9 generations were enslaved. We came over with James Robertson on the original voyage of the settlers of this city, and Christmas Day, 1779. Later, family was enslaved by President Andrew Jackson and also his law partner, John Overton. And so family has always been here, and Nashville will always be home. But getting back to your question, growing up here, I used to love to go to Greer Stadium. Before we had any major league sports, we had the Nashville Sounds in the old Greer Stadium. And I collected baseball cards, and when you went to games, you often got free baseball cards, but of course you bought them at the grocery stores and drugstores. And there was a baseball card shop, of course, that people remember, The Great Escape, which was right near my high school, university school, the original location. And oftentimes after school, I would be at The Great Escape collecting comic books and baseball cards. And then there was another shop in Harding Mall called
Egads, Ed Gaddy.
Yep.
Yes.
And so I spent a lot of time in going to conventions, and you buy things, you buy the price guides, and you look at the value, they go up, and then you trade. I used to have some friends I would trade baseball cards with, and we always had these rules, or I had these rules that, everyone wanted a rookie card, but the only time I would trade you a rookie card was for another rookie card.
Okay.
And then back then, one of my favorite baseball players was Reggie Jackson of the New York Yankees. And if I were to trade a Reggie Jackson card, I would have to get a Reggie Jackson. So a rookie for a rookie and a Reggie for a Reggie were my rules.
Excellent. And so what did you learn in that process about either the possibilities of entrepreneurship or trading? Did that make any kind of impression on you during those formative high school years?
It did. You learned about kind of supply and demand and what people wanted, and prices would fluctuate. You'd buy the little baseball price guide that came out monthly and then a book for a year, and you would see and you'd wonder, well, why did that price go up? And for the old days of baseball cards, it was based on if the player was good or if won a batting title or the MVP or went to the World Series. And then it was that speculative nature that if, there's like 15 good rookies, it's kind of like the NFL draft. Some will turn out to be Hall of Famers and superstars, and others will turn out to be just total bust. And so when you're buying rookie cards, I remember buying probably about 20 Cal Ripken rookie cards because I thought, man, he's really going to be something. And of course that paid off.
That paid off. And it's very similar, obviously, to the business world. Some grow to be really big and lucrative, and others not so much. So then what happened? So that was, what you did for fun and high school here. What did you do after that?
I've always collected things, and even today I collect Nashville memorabilia. I have the largest private collection of Nashville memorabilia, so hopefully one day we'll be in some sort of museum. Nashville does not have a history museum of Nashville. We've never had, and so that's one of the things I'm working on. But one of the things that, as far as being an entrepreneur, is, Nashville's a city that it's a great place to start any sort of business, and has always been. And I've, even in the African-American community, in the days of segregation, you looked at the Jefferson Street area and you had all these local businesses and black doctors and lawyers and shoe shine people and restaurants and nightclubs and hotels. And that's kind of the world I grew up with, just kind of hearing about those kind of entrepreneur stories that people, because of days of segregation, they just started their own business, and they kind of traded amongst each other.
And I want to talk some about your family. You mentioned your family. The first 3 generations, I think you said, were enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
And so talk to us about what you know from your family of the first generation that was not enslaved.
Mm-hmm.
What did Nashville look like then? What were work options, income options, entrepreneurial options for that generation?
Sure. My great-great-grandfather was enslaved. He was born enslaved in 1849, he and his twin brother, Prince Albert Ewing and Taylor Ewing. Now, the irony of these 2 young African-American children being named after the most powerful men in the world. Prince Albert was named for Prince Albert, who was on the throne in England, and Taylor was named for Zachary Taylor, who was president of the United States at the time. But both of them received an education after emancipation, and that was kind of the start of my family. Interestingly enough, Taylor escaped slavery in 1862 from Travelers Rest and then came to the city of Nashville. And the city of Nashville in 1862, the Union Army had occupied the city, and so if you made it kind of behind enemy lines or the lines of the army, you got your freedom. Now, they might put you to work, as Taylor was one of the hundreds of African Americans that were put to work to help build Fort Negley. But he joined a church at the time called First Baptist Church, which was on Broadway next to our arena. And during that time, it was interesting. That church, before emancipation, had received an enslaved child by the name of Nelson Mary. And the church decided they could have sold this child or put him to work in the church. And they put him to work as a janitor at first, but then they taught him how to read and write. And before the Civil War in the 1850s, he became the first Black Baptist minister in the city of Nashville. And First Baptist Church on Broadway had a African-American mission on the top floor, the balcony, and he was in charge of that, and for the freed African-Americans that were in the city at the time. Now, when the Union Army comes in and Civil War, Nashville becomes an occupied city, all the Confederates leave and they flee. And so what ends up happening, Nelson Mary moves out of the balcony and comes down to the main part of the church and runs that church. And that's when Taylor Ewing joins the church too. And the church really grew during the Civil War, and it probably had about 400 or 500 people by the end of the Civil War. And then after the Civil War is over, the former Confederates come back to their sanctuary, and it's kind of like the Broadway show Hamilton. When Thomas Jefferson comes back from Paris, it's like, what did I miss?
Right.
And the African Americans are like, well, we really took care of the building and we grew the church, and we don't want to go back up to the balcony. So First Baptist Church on Broadway helped raise $70,000 for a building to be built for this African-American part of the church. And they moved a few blocks over to 8th Avenue at Martin Luther King today. And that is kind of the church that I grew up in because of this wonderful kind of collaboration during that time.
And is that some of that history? Obviously, one of the major industries that grows up in Nashville is religious publishing. And so what are some of those through lines in terms of the religious community? I mean, that's a great story that you just mentioned of raising $70,000, I assume in 1800s dollars.
A lot of money.
Pretty significant. So how does that connection happen, or what are some of those seeds for religious publishing to thrive?
Getting back to Prince Albert and Taylor, Prince Albert, after the Civil War, was sent to Fisk University by the Overton family and became one of their first college graduates. And then he taught school in the recently formed public schools for African Americans. And then he studied law under a white lawyer named Nathan Baxter, and in 1871 became the first Black lawyer in the city of Nashville. His twin brother Taylor also went to Fisk University, and later in the 1880s also became a lawyer here in Nashville. And Taylor was more of an entrepreneur probably than Prince Albert, although Prince Albert helped found a bank called the People's Savings Bank. It was one of our 2 African Americans banks. It did not survive the Great Depression. But Taylor actually started the 1 cent savings bank with about 9 African Americans, and the 1 cent savings bank still exists today as Citizens.
Yeah.
It's the oldest continuously owned African American bank in the United States. But before he started the 1 cent savings bank in 1904. In 1896, one of his friends, R.H. Boyd, started a publishing company. And Taylor was the lawyer who helped incorporate R.H. Boyd Publishing. Back then it was called the National Baptist Publishing Board. And R.H. Boyd eventually became one of the largest publishers for African Americans in the country. They were based here in Nashville. They hired about 150,000 people. They printed Sunday school material, Bibles, hymnals, sheet music, and it was a force. This city of Nashville had all sorts of religious publishing, the Methodists, the Baptists, and then the African Americans had their own kind of publishing houses. So Taylor was very involved in helping R.H. Boyd get off the ground. And then, like I said, they were both some of the founders of the 1 cent savings bank. And these African Americans were educated, they were driven, and they saw a lot of opportunity in Nashville, which there's an immense number of opportunity in Nashville for African Americans after the Civil War.
And those two companies, the 1 cent savings company, the R.H. Boyd, I mean, those
both still exist today.
I was gonna say, and they become major corporations.
Yes,
but still roots into the 1800s. In this case, people who were born into slavery. And so, what else is happening at the time in Nashville? Those late 1800s. Obviously, there's opportunities, as you mentioned, for African Americans. I assume, of course, there were opportunities for whites as well. Was there interaction? Was there collaboration, or were things still fairly segregated on the business side as these industries took shape?
There was some collaboration that you would maybe buy land from a white business or lease something out. The African American business district, everyone kind of thinks of Jefferson Street, but after the Civil War, it was kind of on 4th Avenue where the Municipal Auditorium is. There was an African American theater there called the Bijou Theater. There was an African American Masonic temple there. There was the Morris Memorial Building, which was a rival religious publishing company to R.H. Boyd. There was law offices, including my great-great-grandfather's, Prince Albert and Taylor's law firm, right there on 4th Avenue, and then medical offices. There was a couple doctors that had their medical offices, dentists there, and later J.C. Napier, of course, had his. So that kind of thriving business district was the heart of the African American community, which sadly was kind of destroyed during urban renewal in the early 50s. Nashville was the first city in the United States to have urban renewal, and basically the city of Nashville, with cooperation with the federal government, basically kind of took over all this property, pushed people out, and they built kind of state office buildings, plazas, parkways, the Municipal Auditorium, and then that's when the African American community was pushed out to North Nashville.
And therefore, if you could have seen Nashville 120 years ago, it looks different. To your point, I mean, obviously we know that, but in terms of, because every business you've described here, I mean, this is a fully robust business ecosystem. Because a lot of times we talk about how Jefferson Street used to be, but it's usually in the context of entertainment, as if unfairly the only businesses that were thriving were entertainment businesses, which is not true. I mean, you've mentioned several, from law firms to medical to others. So what allowed Nashville to have such different industries led by African Americans that had thriving businesses at that point in time?
Today we have 4 historically black colleges here in Nashville. And even right after the Civil War in the 19th century, we had Fisk University, of course. We had a college called Roger Williams University. Roger Williams was a historically black college. It was on where Peabody's campus is today. And that's campus burned a couple times, mysterious fires, and then they kind of reincorporated and moved out to the Whites Creek area. That is kind of the American Baptist campus today. You had Central Tennessee College, which was later Walden University, and that was in South Nashville, kind of near where all the kind of hip things of Wedgwood, Houston are today, in the Soho House. That college had a law school, and it had a medical school. The medical school was Meharry. And so Meharry had spun off in the 1920s and moved over across the street from Fisk University, and then the rest of that college went under. So the number of higher, and then Tennessee State University was, of course, started in 1912. The number of colleges and educational facilities here attracted African Americans, trained professional African Americans, and in business and in healthcare and in science. One of the great kind of African American stories is in the days of segregation, you could not have membership in the American Medical Association if you were a Meharry graduate. It was kind of a club that, only took whites. And so right before the Atlanta World's Fair in 1895, a group of black doctors met here in Nashville, Tennessee, and they decided, why don't we have a professional organization? And so the National Medical Association, which still exists today, as was originally for just black doctors, was started here in Nashville because there were so many professional people that had gathered here, and they decided, let's do this.
Yeah, and so many of these. Again, another entrepreneurial act. It's a trade association, but still something that didn't exist. And so people said, let's create it. And so it was sort of found fertile soil here and was able to grow them. What else is going on in Nashville at the turn of the century into the 1900s from a business standpoint, whether we know these names today or not? What else is happening? And what is the business sort of pre-depression? What do things look like in Nashville? Because we talk about the boom times of today, but a lot of what you're saying is, gosh, if all these things were taking root and growing, seems like it was a pretty exciting time for growth too.
The spread of information was very important. So you had black newspapers. R.H. Boyd had a newspaper called the Nashville Globe, which existed from about 1906. Unfortunately, it ended around 1960, right when the Civil Rights Movement was happening. But that was important. Back then, the Tennessean and the Banner did not cover the African-American community the same way, sometimes not at all. And the African-American newspaper really kind of filled that void. You also had African-American businesses that, professional services, the doctors and the dentists. Meharry has a dental school still today. Before integration, half of the black doctors were graduates of Meharry. But still to this day, 43% of the black dentists are Meharry graduates.
Wow.
And so Meharry has always served that kind of purpose here. And then you had people like Preston Taylor, who was an undertaker and had a funeral home and provided, before we had Hadley Park, our other parks, including Centennial Park, Shelby Park, were segregated. And so Preston Taylor out on Elm Hill Pike decided that he would have a park for African Americans, and it had a baseball diamond and it had rides, and it was just a green space. And so Greenwood Park was this kind of great entrepreneurial effort to kind of bring people together when the city was not doing that same things.
Oh, wow. And you mentioned baseball. And so obviously this is a time when baseball is growing in popularity.
Yes.
And so Sulphur-Dell has kind of gotten its due, so to speak, in terms of where the Sounds play now. But being in North Nashville, what are some of those things that were happening at the time in terms of sports, athletics, recreation, in the community?
Well, in 1920, a Nashvillian by the name of Tom Wilson started a Negro League team called the Nashville Elite Giants. And they, had once played in Sulphur-Dell, but then they built their own ballpark in Wedgwood, Houston area, and it was called Tom Wilson Park. It was only the second Negro League park to be owned by an African-American, and the Elite Giants played there in the 20s and 30s. In fact, it was the first ballpark in Nashville to have lights for night games. They had them before Sulphur-Dell.
Wow.
And Sulphur-Dell was in the area of the Bicentennial Mall today. It's actually the same site where First Horizon Park is. And Sulphur-Dell would flood every now and then. And when it flooded, the Nashville Vols, the white team, actually went over to Wilson Park to play. So Tom Wilson was this great entrepreneur. He was later the commissioner of the Negro Leagues. He moved the team later to Baltimore. They became the Baltimore Elite Giants. And he was the one that he had signed Roy Campanella when the team was here in Nashville. But by the time Roy Campanella played, it was in Baltimore. And so that was just one of the great entrepreneurial stories. And then after the ballpark ceased to be a ballpark, he tore it down and built kind of the African-American version of the Hippodrome. Older Nashvillians will remember the Hippodrome on West End. It's a skating rink and a place where you see wrestling matches, where the Holiday Inn Vanderbilt is. But it became the Paradise Ballroom, which was basically a skating rink, and you could have concerts over there.
What is still standing from this era? You mentioned the Morris Building. I think that's slated to be a hotel or some other redevelopment now.
Yes, and that's one of my historical projects. I'm working with the new owners of that building.
Fantastic.
And curating the history and kind of making it very authentic to what was there and kind of creating some of the old architectural elements when they redesigned the hotel.
So what else would we recognize now from a lot of this time period we're talking about? I mean, I think Nashville is doing an okay job of putting up certain markers, and you can read about it. But is there anything else that we might recognize from this time period?
Sadly, there's not very much because of urban renewal. On both sides of the Capitol. My great grandparents lived on the west side of the Capitol, kind of where the parking lot of the Tennessee Supreme Court is today, and that building was taken from urban renewal. And Taylor kind of lived on Gay Street. Gay Street used to be behind the Capitol and kind of where the guard shack is for when you go up to see the state Capitol. That's where his house was. In the downtown area, south of Broadway, was the African American business district. In fact, from the river to about John Lewis today, that area was the kind of poor African American neighborhood. And if you had brought someone back who lived during that era, the late 19th century, and knew Nashville then and saw Nashville today, they would be shocked that the poor African American neighborhood where the Pinnacle building is, the Symphony Hall, Country Music Hall of Fame, is now one of the kind of high real estate areas in the entire city. My great-great-great-grandmother, who was enslaved by Andrew Jackson, escaped slavery and lived where the Country Music Hall of Fame is after she escaped. But that whole area, the only building that's left from the kind of African-American days is the bell tower, which was the St. Paul's AME church. So that was the kind of big black church in that era. But, everything else is gone. And then, of course, on Jefferson Street, we had a lot of buildings, but then the interstate highway system, when it came through in 1969, tore down what I call the Green Book businesses, the restaurants, the hotels, the nightclubs. The really only major kind of nightclub that's left is Club Barron, which is now an Elks Lodge. That building was just a couple blocks away from the interstate, but the famous Club Del Morocco, where Jimi Hendrix played, and the house band, was gone because of urban renewal. Churches were gone. The Browns Hotel, which was a great supper club and restaurant, and the place where African Americans could stay. You could not stay in the bigger, nicer, grand hotels before 1964, and so that was a very important place for entertainers and other visitors to stay in Nashville.
So much of it just wiped out.
Gone.
You mentioned sort of close to this area. We talked about it earlier, but this building that we're in. So obviously these are known as the trolley barns.
Yes.
And I told you when I was new on the job, I said, let me go find a picture of the trolley barns as they once were, and let me find the old trolley routes to show people. And there weren't any trolleys near here. So
developers are their own entrepreneurs and marketers, and they come up with a name and they put it on signs and market it, and everyone uses it.
Everyone uses it. So yeah, tell us about this. And obviously we're close to the old hospital, and this area continues, like most of and a lot of Nashville, to change almost daily. And so what was this area truly, these barns, but also what was happening in this little pocket of Sobro, as we call it now?
I probably know more about this because years ago, Ben and Max Goldberg, who started Pinewood Social down the road, hired me to kind of do the history of this area. So that's one of the things I do. I work with developers, hotel companies, bars, and restaurants. If they're wanting to know their history, it's a very deep dive. And so, interestingly enough, after the Civil War, during the Civil War, we cut down every single tree in Nashville. There was not a tree left. And there needed to be a lot of lumber kind of bought here to rebuild. And so, ironically, and this had nothing to do with the name of the restaurant, the lumber that was bought here after the Civil War was Pinewood.
There you go.
Crazy.
Wow.
And then this area was owned by the city of Nashville, and they built these kind of brick structures up here. Now, the hospital, the general hospital, had been there since the 1890s. That was kind of the city hospital. And up until recently, when Phil Bredesen merged General Hospital with Meharry, then they moved over to the Meharry campus. And, of course, the remnants, they tore down probably about half of the original General Hospital building, but half of it's left. And those are now apartments overlooking the Cumberland River. But the interesting thing, when the city built these buildings, trolley barns were not trolley barns. They were municipal garages. That
Okay.
doesn't sound as interesting as trolley
Not as
barns.
exciting.
Actually, we did have trolley barns. They were across from where Municipal Auditorium is today. And it basically took up a whole city block. If you look at old pictures, it's just massive, the number of streetcars in there that they basically kind of repaired them and fixed them. And that was the central location that they left. But these buildings originally, this was a dog pound. This was the city's first dog pound. And then they fixed parking meters here. And then, of course, it was a municipal garage that repaired city-owned vehicles, police vehicles, fire vehicles, buses. But sadly, the trolley era ended in the late 1930s.
Okay.
And these buildings weren't built until the late 40s, so never
There you
trolley
go.
barns.
Didn't even have a chance to. And then were empty for a while, these buildings?
They were empty. I'm surprised they didn't get torn down over the years. And the reason they didn't get torn down because nobody really wanted to be up here. There was just, you were near the city hospital, not the kind of place where most entrepreneurs would want to be. And, Nashville, the story of Nashville is really interesting. We could talk a lot about Lower Broadway. Lower Broadway, was this not, okay. The story of Nashville is a very interesting story, particularly downtown Nashville. Downtown Nashville was traditionally the place where people lived, worshiped, saw movies, did business, and then that started to change after World War II. The suburbs started to build. The GI Bill, people were given money, and they built houses in Donaldson and in Madison and Hermitage and Green Hills and all the areas around, and people started to move out of the city. And then retail started to move out of the city. We had shopping malls like Madison was first, and then the Green Hills Shopping Center was second, and then we had Hickory Hollow, 100 Oaks, and all these other things. So the old days of Harvey's, Canestone's, Castronauts downtown, although they kept their flagship stores, but then that was just kind of tenuous, and then even those flagships closed. Even churches left downtown. The First Presbyterian Church left downtown in the 50s and moved out to the Oak Hill area. And so you had this in movie theaters. Of course, they went to these shopping centers. And so really the only people that were kind of left in downtown in the 70s and 80s were the bankers and the lawyers. And then Lower Broadway originally was, and I've done research on Lower Broadway about Acme and about the Paradise Park building and about Alan Jackson's. They hired me to kind of do the history of that building. But Lower Broadway, 100 years ago, it's where you bought your furniture. Probably 75% of the buildings on Lower Broadway were furniture stores. The Margaritaville building that just sold, that was a furniture store. The building where Kid Rock's was, that was most of those buildings that's where you bought your furniture.
Just because it was easier to get furniture there, off the river, off a rail or something?
Off the river and rail, and that's just kind of where all the furniture people
You went to shop there.
went.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, but by the 70s, the area had a bunch of peep shows, adult movie theaters, and pawn shops. And it was so bad that, nobody went to Lower Broadway. No self-respecting person went down there because there was really no reason. Yes, Tootsie's was there since 1960, but everything else was just kind of seedy. And even Tootsie's was probably a little seedy back then. And then the Grand Ole Opry, which had been in the Ryman since 1943, decided, we don't like downtown anymore. Our building is kind of almost 100 years old and needing renovation, doesn't have air conditioning. And you know what? Our patrons that are waiting in line to come in the Ryman and the line stretched around the Lower Broadway, they're getting mugged while waiting in line. They're getting propositioned by prostitutes and then drug dealers. And so we're out of here. Opry moves in 1974, and it just gets worse. And so what ends up happening, Phil Bredesen gets elected in 1991. And he is just the visionary leader of Nashville that basically changed the face of Nashville for generations to come. He laid the foundation for its city. So Phil Bredesen's first State of Metro speech in 1991 was all about just good government. We had gotten through a period where people didn't trust our local government, didn't trust our local politicians. And so Bredeson's like, okay, I'm going to fix things. And then his second State of Metro speech in 1992 was, I think, one of the famous political speeches of all time. We call it the helicopter speech.
Okay.
And amongst, 500 or 600 business leaders, Bredeson laid out a vision of Nashville, downtown Nashville, that we didn't even have. And Phil Bredesen takes us on this imaginary helicopter ride 500 feet above the city and says, you can have an art museum.
Oh.
You could have an arena. You could have a football stadium. Country Music Hall of Fame can be down here. A new downtown library. He called all this civic furniture. Basically, if the government invested, and it was very Keynesian economics, because no one was putting any money in downtown Nashville. But if the government invested, then the private sector would. And so Bredesen created all this stuff, and all those things from the Frisk Museum, downtown library, Country Music Hall of Fame, football stadium, arena, all got done because of that one speech and that one vision. And the skid of downtown Nashville stopped in 1994. 4 things happened. One was the Hard Rock Cafe opened. Second was the Wild Horse Saloon opened on 2nd Avenue. You wouldn't have put it on Lower Broadway back then because Lower Broadway was still very sketchy. And then the Batman building opened. And then last, after being dark for 20 years, the Ryman Auditorium reopened. And so it was now okay to kind of invest and come back into downtown Nashville because of all the things that Phil Bredesen had done.
Yeah, and that obviously Bredesen being an entrepreneur prior to his political career, it does take. It's inspiring to hear that sort of vision. And again, as also as someone who came of age in Nashville in the mid to late '90s, I went to Hume Fogg High School. I worshipped at the First Baptist there at 7th and Broad, and so to see some of these things. I mean, my family would go after church on Sunday to the Hard Rock because you're like, oh, this is cool. We're downtown now, and to drive for several years up all the way up 8th Avenue from my house and where my parents still live to Hume Fogg, and now to see what it is and to see students go there, to go back in the building now, is to see still these things that have been there a long. My grandfather graduated from Hume Fogg in '36, and so to see like that building still standing, but then all these new things you're talking about.
He was there with Dinah Shore.
With Dinah Shore
and Betty Page.
That's right.
Yes.
And so he, when I started in '96, 60 years later, he asked me if some of his teachers were still there. I didn't think so. I didn't ask. I didn't think so. And so now, obviously, here we are, 2025. Downtown seems to have accomplished what Bredesen envisioned in '94, maybe even more so.
Yeah.
To an extent.
What Bredesen also understood at the time is we were becoming a donut city. That means the core was just dead and empty and the suburbs were booming. And when someone visits your city, they might be going to Green Hills or they might even be going to Franklin, but they want to see downtown. Yeah. It's like, what's going on downtown? And if you're not very interesting, that just kind of shies people away. The other great thing that we did about 25 years ago was start the Downtown Partnership. One of the mottos of the Downtown Partnership is clean and safe, active and attractive. And a lot of private money and tax money that is generated downtown goes into those mottos, particularly clean and safe. So City of Nashville picks up trash once a day. Downtown Partnership starts picking up at 6 a.m., goes well late into the evening doing that. Your city has to be spotless. You know, if you want people to live in downtown Nashville, to visit or even invest, nobody is going to pay $75 million for a building on Lower Broadway if the city is dirty or Lower Broadway is dangerous. And so a lot of the police protection that you see down on Lower Broadway, the city provides, but then the Downtown Partnership supplements that too. So it's a wonderful public-private partnership. And we've created, you know, in the 80s, if you wanted to go to a cool entertainment district, you went to Beale Street in Memphis or Bourbon Street in New Orleans or even the Las Vegas Strip. Now Lower Broadway is the best in the country by far. I mean, all those bars down there, you know, live music gets started playing at 10 o'clock in the morning, goes till 3 a.m. Nobody has anything close to that.
Yeah. And what are the opportunities that creates. So you mentioned, obviously, we have a revitalized entertainment district. We have more residents downtown than maybe any other time. So it's not just that we have these pillars or these big tentpole kind of arena, museum, et cetera, but there's lots of other opportunities and industries that pop up as a result of that create an opportunity for entrepreneurs to come in, love them or hate them. The party bus scene, lots of things that cater to tourists. Hotels are owned by entrepreneurs. So there's all of these other things that fall off of that, or these third order effects when you have that, but also not just the core. You mentioned WeHo earlier. We can talk about all of these other neighborhoods that are also seeing an influx of entrepreneurs, including North Nashville,
right?
Including some other parts.
So Nashville used to always be the best kept secret. If you knew about it, it's like, okay, don't tell too many people. This is a really cool city. And then the New York Times put us on blast in 2013 and wrote this article declaring us the It City.
The It City, right?
And everything's been crazy ever since.
Everybody was like, please don't.
We were no longer the It City. And it was interesting, about 6 months before that article came out, I felt that there was something different going on in Nashville. That we've always been this kind of boom town, but it was really feeling different. And I was at City House, one of my favorite restaurants, and there was a couple there. He was a general counsel of a clothing company in New York, and his wife. I was like, well, what are you doing here? Are you going to move here? You're going to invest here? You're going to open up a company? And they're like, no, we're not. We just kept on hearing about all the great restaurants in Nashville, and we had to come here on the weekend and try them out. I was like, wait a minute. You're from New York City, and you heard about our restaurants there, and you want to leave New York, which has some of the best restaurants in the world, and come to Nashville? I was like, yeah, that's right.
At least he was at City House.
And so, and so to me, that was my aha moment, that basically the reason that we're the It City, and no one's really kind of delved into this, because we had the Grand Ole Opry starting in 1925. We weren't the It City then, and even more in the modern world, we had the Predators and the Titans come here in the late 90s. We weren't the It City. 2001 was a great year for Nashville. We opened up the Frisk Museum, the Downtown Library, and the New Country Music Hall of Fame, all before September 11th. We weren't the It City then. 2006, we opened up the Skirmahorn. We weren't the It City then. The only thing that had changed in the last 10 or 12 years was we had these world-class restaurants and these great chefs that ran them. And now great hotels too, that, if you want to attract people from the East Coast and the West Coast and these affluent travelers, they don't want to come to your city if you don't have amazing food and great places to stay. And so the reason that we're the It City is because of these restaurateurs. They don't get enough credit.
And does it help to have a signature dish like hot chicken?
Oh, absolutely. Hot chicken goes back to the Prince family in the 1930s, but it was really Bill Purcell that kind of elevated hot chicken as a brand. Growing up in Nashville, I know if someone asked you, well, Philadelphia has cheesesteaks, Chicago has pizza, what do you have? And people would say, maybe the meat and three. It's like, that's not even a food.
That's
it's
right.
the way you serve food.
Yeah.
And so when Purcell was mayor, he started the Hot Chicken Festival. He would go to Prince's for lunch once or twice a week. And, that just really, and then more hot chicken restaurants opened. It used to just be Prince's, Bolton's, and then Laurie Morgan briefly had a hot chicken place. Yeah. And so more hot chicken places also increased the brand. And now when you travel the country or the world, you'll see Nashville hot chicken on the menu of many great restaurants.
That's
and so that really helps too.
A couple more questions. One, what concerns you? So to your point, if it was restaurateurs, hospitality industry that allowed us to kind of take things up a level, as Nashville gets more expensive, as it gets saturated, crowded, what are the things that we should guard against, or at least keep in mind to make sure that we continue that same spirit or that same opportunity?
This is what I would have told you 25 years ago.
Okay.
Affordable housing and historic preservation. And they kind of have something to do with it. Historic preservation meaning if you tear down all your cool old buildings, you just become some regular city that they all look the same. And affordable housing is key. About 2.5 years ago, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal came to Nashville, and I spent half a day with that person. And he was doing an article on inflation and using Nashville as an example. So we got in the car and drove him around. We went to Murfreesboro Road, and there was a Waffle House there. There were 2 employees working at the Waffle House. One had just moved back in with her parents at age 45, and the other had taken a third job. And then we went down the street to the Drake Motel where the stars stay. And there was a housekeeper there, and she was just barely holding on. I don't even see how she was kind of surviving with all the expensive housing and things like that. Then we went down the street to a gas station right next to the Napier Sudicum homes. And we went inside, and there happened to be a teacher friend of mine who had been teaching in metro schools for about 25 years. And this was the first summer that she had to work during the summer. And one of the things that I'm most concerned with is our creative community, our musicians, our artists, our singers, our songwriters. And I remember telling the reporter from the Wall Street Journal about how people come here and you don't immediately get discovered. This is a 5 or 10 year town, and you've got to play and put in your dues and do all the other things. And so I said, and this is the last sentence of the article in the Wall Street Journal about Nashville inflation. I said, because of expensive housing, are we missing out on the next Vince Gill because that person can't afford to move here or stay here long enough to be discovered? And that's what I still worry about. The creatives and even the entrepreneurs, the people that come here, with a dream and a little bit of money, hear these stories all the time, $500, $1,000, and they started some global company just from nothing. Nashville's an unbelievable place to start a company and a business, but if it comes too expensive, we don't get those entrepreneurs.
Last question. So back to you in terms of what you do. You've mentioned you've got this a great business where you consult with, get to talk to brands, businesses to make sure we tell the Nashville story. What are you looking forward to, say, over the next decade as things continue to grow? And then what are some other opportunities? Obviously, please mention where folks can find you and sort of the stories you tell online as well.
Sure. My Instagram page is probably the best place. It's called The Nashville I Wish I Knew. My tour consulting company is called NashvilleHistoryOnTour.com. You could find me there. But no, what I'm excited about, Nashville is a city of collaboration, and people will always kind of help each other out. Although people are competitive, people in healthcare, people in banking, but they still want to help each other because someone gave them that opportunity when you came here. And so for this city, like I said, I really hope that we don't tear down kind of what made us cool. I hope we provide a place for, the creative people and the singers and songwriters to kind of live and create great songs. We write more songs in this city by noon than any other city in a month or a year. And if we lose that, that's not who we are as Nashvillians. We just become this big other city. So I want us to continue to be a welcoming, friendly city, and a city where there's opportunity for anybody, no matter what your race, your gender. It's just, go do great things in Nashville.
David, what's another story that we may not know, not be aware of a business that started in Nashville?
One of my favorite stories happened in 1929. A Furman University dropout was interviewing for a job at a snack food company here in town, and it was the assistant warehouse manager job. And they give him the offer, and he doesn't take it. And then a week later, he realizes, hey, I need a job. That was a pretty good job. So he calls this warehouse company back. It's like, sorry, we already gave that job to someone else, but you could have the delivery truck job. And so he leaves Furman, comes to Nashville, takes the delivery truck. He leaves Furman, comes to Nashville, takes the delivery truck job. But shortly after he comes here, the company that has offices in Memphis and in Atlanta decides to close their Nashville operation. But they say to this guy, you want to buy it? Here, it's yours.
By the Nashville operation?
Yes.
Okay.
He doesn't have any money.
No.
Okay. This operation is located across from Belmont University in the old place where the bookstore used to be and where the architectural school is. And so someone sent him to Sam Fleming, one of the greatest bankers of all time at Third National Bank. And Sam Fleming really liked this kid. And he decided, I'm going to lend you 80% to buy the business, but you got to go find the other 20%. So when this guy was delivering from this warehouse, the gas station that's still across the street from Belmont in that location, the owners of that let him fill up on credit. So he's like, well, maybe they'll invest in my company. And He asked them, and they said, sure, they like the kid. And so he goes back to Sam Fleming and asks him some advice, because the snack food company is still going to exist in Memphis and Atlanta, and they want him to change the name because you're no longer affiliated with us. And he said, well, what should I call it? And Sam Fleming says, I don't care. Name it after your damn self, kid. So Herman Lay makes Lay's potato chips in Nashville. Wow. It starts here in Nashville. He later buys Fritos, and they merge from Texas. Yep. And when he dies in 82, he's chairman of PepsiCo, which includes Yum Brands, Kentucky Fried Chicken, Pepsi, all the Lay's empire. And the interesting thing, I talked to one of Sam Fleming's friends about that deal, and he said that Sam Fleming didn't even care about snack food and really just didn't think it was a very good industry, but he really liked Herman Lay. Wow. And Sam Fleming always bet on the jockey, not the horse.
Not the horse. So because Herman Lay was too late or turned down the warehouse job, got the delivery job, the company closed, he bought it, renamed it, and then it's a global brand.
Yes, and there's another interesting synergy with Belmont University. So across the street, there's the Curb Event Center, which the Beeman family has given a lot of money to, too. The Beeman family, outside of cars, made their money by being the Pepsi-Cola bottler of Nashville. And so that synergy of, PepsiCo through Herman Lay's leadership, more money for Belmont. And then the other thing, the rest of the story, is the gas station across the street. The gas station had always dealt with Belmont students, and they were very popular. And then in the 80s, Belmont gets an unsolicited gift of $10,000 from the owners of the gas station. Now, Belmont today gets millions of dollars gifts, tens of millions. But back then, that was a big gift for Belmont, and they were very grateful. And the president of Belmont says, I don't even know these people. And they gave me $10,000. Start inviting them to more things. Yeah. And they did, and they just always liked the students in Belmont. And then years later, lawyer contacts Belmont and says those people that owned the gas station died. And the president says, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I really like them. They left you some money, the Belmont University, in their will. And the president's thinking, well, maybe they left $50,000 or even $100,000. They never really sold their interest in Lay's. This $24 million gift. Cow. There's a statue in front of the Curb Event Center of these two people waving to a student. Yeah. That's them.
They owned a gas station and invested in Lay's potato chips.
Yes.
It's a great word to end on. David, thank you for your time today. Thank you for all these stories to help us learn more about the Nashville we all wish we knew and the Nashville we still hope to create. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, as always, for tuning in to this episode of Circle Back. As always, these are brought to you through the generosity of the Beth and Randy Chase family, as well as Nashville Post. Be sure to share, listen, like, subscribe, and tell everybody you know about Circle Back on wherever you listen to podcasts.